Brenda, can you give us a brief overview of what we will be watching?
Okay, the students are in small groups, and it's an introduction into ionic bonding. So I've just given them 15 examples of formulas, and they are trying to figure out how to put those formulas into different groups based on the ratios or based on like their locations on the periodic table. So as a group, they're coming up with like how to separate them and a justification for why like these 3 compounds go together and these 4 might go together and so on.
What grade level are these students we are observing?
They are 10th through 12th graders.
And about how many students are in this class?
There's about 30.
Is there a particular AIW standard you are most interested in meeting at a high level? So we have higher order thinking, depth of knowledge and student understanding, substantive conversation, and value beyond school.
Since they're doing the discussions, we'll go with that. The standard 3, the substantive conversations.
Are there any clarifying questions? As we watch and script, remember to listen for big ideas being taught, capture quotes, make tallies, map exchanges for your conversations, and record student responses. And so before we watch the video, we'll split up into 2 groups to what we're going to score. So higher order thinking and substantive conversation go together. So we'll have 4 people work on that. Okay. So should we just do 1, 2, 3, 4?
Yep, you guys do.
Okay. And so Brant and Krista and Tracy will be doing depth of knowledge, student understanding, and value beyond school.
4 or lose 1, 2, 3, 4. Gain 4 or lose 4.
If it's gonna go this way, like.
Oh, gain 5 or lose 3. So I'm gonna lose 3 then. So it has to lose 3. So negative 3 here, negative 3 here. So we get this right there. This 6 right here is all these combined. Okay.
Shouldn't that be a negative 6?
It's a positive 6. Okay, it needs to gain 6. Overall, I need to gain 6. Fine, so let's do this. Since it needs to gain 2, let's put like 1, 2, 3. Each circle needs to gain 2. And since all these 3, we put all them together, that will be plus 6. You put these 2 together, that would be negative 6. That would cancel out.
Why is that negative?
Because you add them together.
Negative and negative makes sense.
I mean, but like...
Because those negative 3s are from gallium.
But gallium, isn't it?
Gallium needs to lose 1, 2, 3.
1.
You know,
yeah.
You know how fast I need to lose 1? So we get negative 6, you get 0, 0 here. So that would be gallium, and what's the other one?
Sulfur.
Sulfur. So that would be group 13, group 16. So they're
Sulfur needs to gain 2. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But it has a 3, alright.
Yep, it has 3 though.
Yeah,
These, and these 2. So sodium, 2 parts sodium, 1 part oxygen. These 2 should be the same because K2 and SC right here. It's just different periods.
Yeah.
That's 2 another one right there. These are the same thing.
No, those are different. Those 2. Yeah.
Those 2?
They're different. They're on the east side.
Oh yeah. True. So that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 groups already.
So we just write the groups in here then?
Yeah, I got to come up with that.
Is there another way to like reduce this?
Okay. You want me to do the first 2?
Yeah, this is too much.
I'm just gonna do these 2 here. Okay, so should I say they're in the same group? Like for this particular. So B, E, and S, and M, G, and T, E, they're in the same group. So like.
So
B,
so group 2 and S is group 16. 216. So it'd be like. I don't know. That's the same thing, group 2, right?
Yeah, they're the same thing. That's why they're in the group together.
So that would be, this is the same thing too. And, wait, no, look at all the, what they have, by, in terms of,
This means there's two.
You guys even have labels.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you going to explain this?
Okay, so we went to the periodic table and we just found the elements and which group they are.
Okay.
And so, like, this one was in group 1, so we found that this one was in group 16, so they have, like, similarity because they're in the same group.
So like both of these examples of compounds, you have something from a group 1 with something from a group 16.
Yeah.
So that part. And then what happens to their formula when they're like that? Like, is the ratio always the same, or?
Yeah, you need two elements from group 1 and only one from group 16.
Do you guys agree with that? So she's saying 2 with this and then 1 with that to fit that your grouping of 1 and 16. Okay, so that's good with this one. All right, Teresa, do you want to take the next one to explain?
Well, we did the same thing, like based on groups, and that one was like group 2 and 16.
Okay. So 2, 16, but then the ratio ends up being
It's the same.
the same.
1 and 1.
1 and 1. Okay. So we're good with that?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Then you got the next one here, Serena?
Alright, those ones were from group 13 and 16, and you needed 2 from group 13 and 3 from group 16.
Okay. That fits it. 2 of them, 13, 16. And then do these all kind of fit the same where you have your groups? That's what these numbers here, right? 13, 17, 2, 17, and then your ratios fall on with it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. That seems
We
good.
didn't really have to look at the numbers. We just found the elements in here, and I guess they just like have the same ratios, like 3 and 2 and 3 and 1, 1.
So you're saying once you found the groups and that
Yeah.
they were from the same
Yeah,
kinds
they're
of groups,
just matched.
the patterns
Yeah.
emerged, right? So you did not start by looking at the actual subscripts.
No.
No,
Just the elements.
you went off by locating and then found that pattern later.
Yeah.
That's good. Very, very good, ladies. So then what you want to do would be take that information, like what you were just explaining to me, and you want to write it out in rules. So then the idea would be if I gave you another one, right? Could I follow your rules and figure out which group it goes in, right? Okay, that's good. Keep on going.
And then IN and PR.
We redid our sorting.
You redid your sorting, okay.
Yeah. And we came up with going by groups. Like this was all group 1, the first element was in group 1.
Okay.
And then this one was all the first elements were in group 2, and that one was all the elements were in group 13, but valence electrons 3.
Okay. So then what about the second element? I like your beginning point. So you've got 3 groups based on the first element, right? Where they're from on the periodic table?
Yeah.
Wouldn't the second element be just as important?
Yeah.
So do we need to look within like your group 1, okay, we're calling that group 1,
Yeah.
and see if there's anything that has to do with the second element that you can, like a pattern that has to do with that?
Right.
Oh.
Can I have you do that now?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get it.
You get it? Tell me what you're getting, Allie.
Okay. Well, like this one is from like this row, but if you look at this one, it's from oxygen. So you're gonna see if like any of these have anything of the same group, right?
Okay.
Kinda ish.
So like those two.
Okay.
And then let's see
Like if
these two and these two. So like that, right?
I don't know. Well, what group is chlorine in?
Chlorine's in 17.
And then what group is fluorine in?
Chlorine
17.
So does it have to be separate? Okay. Oh, okay. Do you see that? Could they be together like that?
Yeah.
Now I want you to look, once you've done that division, look at your formulas. Do you see any pattern that's appeared because you just did that?
Yes.
That means that the way you said it is you're not sure.
We have the no subscript here. Couple where?
Okay, so no subscripts there, which do you guys remember from like 8th grade stuff?
Yeah,
If they don't have a subscript, even though they don't write it, it means how many do you have of each one? One. And then if you look at the other group, you see subscripts, so it means of the first element, how many do you have?
2.
And of the second, how many do you have?
1.
Right? Okay, so I want you to keep going along that and think about these other 2 groups and see if they have to stay all together or if you should further divide them, okay?
Okay.
All right.
So I'm going to circle discrepant scores with higher order thinking, substantive conversation, and then the discrepant scores with depth of knowledge and value beyond school. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right, so we'll do this. All right, so higher order thinking, Cindy, you gave it a 3. I gave it a 4. So you would like to tell us why you scored the instruction a 3 with evidence from the rubric?
So when I went through and I looked at the rubric with the sustained higher order thinking, and I noticed that that majority of the time it seemed as though most students in the first conversation were engaged and thinking at a higher level. But when I looked at the second and third conversations, I didn't notice as much higher order thinking without Brenda actually having to I don't know how to explain it, but she had to kind of get them to think with certain questions. So she was part of the sustained conversation, which is fine, but I thought that I just kind of saw the students kind of thinking at a higher level in the first conversation, or without the prompting from the teacher. And I don't know, I was really close to going with a 4, and I was between a 3 and a 4, and I settled for a 3, just because we only saw the 3 groups, and I thought, well, the 2 groups were more in the 3 level, and one group was more at a 4, so I went with a 3.
I scored the instruction a 4 because I went back to page 74, the spirit of the standard, and I underlined under higher order thinking, does the lesson have students work with knowledge and new ways to create generalizations? And I thought that's exactly what they were doing. So that made it easier for me to start with, and I started at a 3 and I went up from the 3 because the word in 3 it says most students are engaged in lower level, but there is at least one significant question or activity in which many perform some hot. And on 4, there's at least one major activity that occupies a substantial portion of the lesson. And by substantial, I have 80% of the lesson. Mm-hmm. And I, from what I observed, thought that about 80% of the lesson they were. Yes, she had to guide them to those, to make those generalizations and figure out the patterns that they were. But I thought that for 80% of the time, there was a majority of the students were doing that higher order thinking and trying to come up with those patterns. Guys, any other ideas with hot?
Yeah, the spirit of the standard was key, because I was between a 3 and a 4, not knowing which way to go. And I knew it was between those two, and then when I went back and I saw the working with knowledge in new ways, you know, having to categorize it in not a certain way, but in a way they found, was huge. So that's what took me from a 3 to say, yes, it's a 4. So I guess that part helped me.
Okay, how about substantive conversation? Let's see, Ryan gave it a 4.
All right, so in watching the groups, it was very interesting watching the different students interact, and so I think we can all agree that I thought that first group was very good at going back. I think I heard all voices except for one student, and so I thought that was like one of the most clear substantive conversations that I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, it was like, it's there. The other ones, it was more difficult. So when I looked at it, I started because with the higher order thinking one with the spirit of the standard, I started there this time. And does a lesson use dialogue to build shared and coherent understanding? And then I just kept going back and trying to understand the 3 pieces, and kind of just thought of it as a checklist in my head. And so when it says 4, most students participate in all 3 features. And so they talk about a theme, concept, theme, or problem. And so they were definitely all focused around the desired focus of solving the problem, of categorizing them. Was their sharing of ideas. Yeah, they were back and forth saying, hey, do you do this? What if we do it this way? And then the dialogue, was it building coherently? And that's one that I felt was key in there, because when it was sustaining, they just kept going back and giving their input and then building off of each other. So it was just that, we hear at the meetings all the time, piggybacking off of each other, and it was huge. And then when it says most students participate, in those, there was maybe 2 or 3 students who weren't participating in that. They were engaged, but they weren't necessarily participating. So out of the 10 students we saw in the group, 70% of them were.
Brenda, talk about why you gave it 3.
Then, well, I went through, because it says it has to have 3 features. So I do think they were focused on the concept I wanted them to do was to put them into the groups. And they were, what I wanted them to do was share ideas, and I think they were that part's fine. Then you get to the sustained conversation. And I know, part of what I wanted recorded was when they were talking individually like that. It's more when I'm asking them, I wasn't sure. I mean, I think, like you said, kind of brought up, it took me kind of prompting them or facilitating it so that I'm not sure. And I purposely, like with the one group, made sure to have try to get each of the students. But then with that second time I went through, it was an interaction between me and just the one, and the other 2 were off to the side, and I didn't make a conscious setup. So it's I'm like, okay, that part, the sustained conversation, But then it goes into that most, many, okay, all of that too, back on page 74. And most is more than half. So I agree with you in the groups that were recorded, but then I look at what's in the background too. And they were kind of talking, but I'm not sure if it's because the camera's on them that they get, if you saw the one, they weren't doing anything wrong, but they definitely, their talking wasn't, so.
Go back to what you said about your sustained conversation.
Yeah.
For a 4, you only have to have one example of that.
Okay.
And so I thought about that too, because your first group of boys that were there, they definitely had one, the one Ryan was referring to.
Okay.
And that's why when I scored it a 4 also, because I saw that one example.
Okay.
And then the other 2 criteria were met by the other students.
All right.
And many, or most, if you go back, it's just over 50%.
Okay.
And I guess, I wasn't looking at the kids in the background. I kind of went with what
But
Ryan said.
like I said, I don't know if it's
7 of
that
them were
because then the camera
participating.
comes over and they start, because they're like, you're recording this people right in front of me, and then they don't talk as much. Because I knew the groups were working, because when I would go around to each group, they were ready to talk to me. So they couldn't have been sitting there doing nothing, I guess. But that was where I'm like, okay, the most, many, all the different to have it. So, okay.
All right, so we're going to move on to depth of knowledge and student understanding, and we're going to have Krista and Tracy both talk. Krista scored a 5 on the depth of knowledge, student understanding, and Tracy a 4.
Okay, go
You
first.
can fight. Who gets to go first?
Who's going to go first? I gave it a 4. For the concept, I thought it was patterns, because Brenda said patterns a million times throughout as she talked to the kids. So I thought that was easy to pick up on. So they were looking for patterns to categorize the stuff into groups. And I went with what the kids were doing as well. So I felt like in the groups, in our first group that we saw, they were pretty much engaged, all of them except one. And in the second group, it was so hard to tell with the second group because you talked to them individually. They didn't carry on a conversation, but they knew what was going on, and they could tell you exactly what was going on. And then I was kind of watching the background as well, so I thought there was a little off-task behavior back there. And when we got to the last group, I felt like there were 2 main people, and even in the first group, I felt there were 2 main people who were doing most of the work, and the other 2 were kind of listening and handing them things. And one kid said one comment in that, which made it a good conversation, but I just felt like, I don't know, that's why I gave it a 4. I thought it was really deep conversations, but I don't know if everybody was getting there.
Krista?
With this one, it's hard because there's the concept of like the depth of knowledge on one hand, where the teacher sets up the expectations, and then the student understanding of what the students are actually demonstrating. So I went and I kind of have mine color coded a little bit with like what fits with the depth of knowledge, and the depth of knowledge is making sure that the students are set up to experience deep knowledge, and they're being able to like construct their own learning of it. And I thought you did a great job with that, Brenda, because they're having to put together the pieces to organize. And one of the things I underlined in the rubric was that they have to discover the relationships, and that's exactly what the card sort was doing, to be able to make those relationships. And then it also, for the student understanding part of it, they have to be able to construct the explanation to show that they understand. So it's going beyond just simply putting stuff in a pile, because, I mean, I could do that, but being able to explain why that justification shows that student understanding. So I thought you were right. She was focused on a concept. She focused on that patterns. And I thought that the student understanding came from their reasoning and explanation for what kind of pattern they developed or what they saw. You know, I went back and forth between, do almost all the students do it, or is it only many of the students?
That's where I have that
so bad
squared.
at
I don't
those,
know
yeah.
what and many means.
Well, I have like more than half, and almost all means maybe one or two didn't.
Okay.
So it's like we only saw 10 students, and I would say maybe one or two in the group didn't get videotaped sharing their justification, or they were just kind of following along with what the group leader said. But I really don't know if I could bump it all the way down to only half of them expressed that they could understand the idea of patterns. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt.
I would agree with that, and I guess I need to not focus on things that are going, just focus on the groups, the kids that we see. That's what I have to maintain my focus.
Especially if those are the ones that Brenda has chosen to share with us.
Exactly.
It was more like at the time,
I'm sorry.
they were ready for me to, they had to get their groups and have a reason and then have it checked off by me.
Okay.
And those were groups that were ready for that step. They had like their hand up or something, so I knew I'm ready to go to you.
Yeah.
And while some of them, if they weren't ready yet, I didn't.
Okay.
But like the original group, no one was ready, so we just started with their first conversation, their start. So.
All right, so let's look at value beyond school. Grant gave it a 3. Tracy gave it a 1. Krista gave it a 2. So we're going to have Grant and Tracy. I'm going to have Grant and Tracy talk, and then Krista can say why she was the average of you two.
Okay, I have no idea. I gave it because I don't know if kids would know what they're learning and how it would connect to the real world or real world skills. I think they understand that they're doing chemistry, that they need this to go on to the next science class, but I don't know if they could have, if you went up to them and said, you know, how are you going to use this in the real world? You know, maybe one of the farm boys could answer that, but I don't know if just the average Joe would know how that would connect. So I know there's connection somewhere, but even I would have a problem with it. I mean, you know, if you're not a scientist, how it would connect. So I guess that's why I gave it a 1, because I just don't know if they know.
I went above a 1. I thought that there was a connection. And in one of the groups, I think it was the first group, they brought up what their connection was, and I don't even remember how they worded it. And that moved me above a 1. And then it was just trying to figure out between a 2 and a 3. I felt like all 3 groups that we saw knew at least how it was to be used. I may have stretched a little bit on the value beyond school part, the what you said, you know, how do you use it beyond that. I may have stretched a little bit, may have given that benefit of the doubt a little bit on that. When I read through the rubric, it says many students use knowledge or skills, but only some of the students recognize the value of the classroom knowledge. So I guess I went back to, in all 3 groups, I felt that many of the students did understand the skill, and some of them understood where it could be used maybe outside the classroom.
Okay, so as the mediator, and now I'm listening, I'll just tell you why I put a 2 to begin with. I have the words in the second, or in the last paragraph on page 82, I have the words answering, performing, and solving circled. And so in my mind, they were solving a problem. They were having to sort, and to me that's solving a problem because they had to justify why and come up with like the categories and stuff. But now from the conversation, like sometimes I have to go back to the spirit of the standard like Maggie does because the words get overwhelming. And on page 74, the spirit says, does the lesson have students apply academic knowledge to a situation to solve a problem outside of school? And it did not ask them to. So I would probably change my score to a 1. Because the big idea of the patterns is obviously something that a chemist or a professional scientist would use in their life, but this task and what we saw the students doing did not ask them to apply that anywhere beyond just that simple activity to get checked off on Brenda's list. So I would change my score.
Does it get applied somewhere? Is it in a part we missed?
Well, as we continue to go through the stuff on ionic bonding, then they start to understand. And so they have these different types of them and how to recognize them and how ionic compounds are different than covalent compounds in their properties and how they behave chemically. So, and even stuff in their everyday life, like the sodium chloride, the example of an ionic compound, why does it have certain characteristics compared to like water, which has covalent bonding? As we keep going, but for this one task, there is no application beyond that because this is like your introduction to the bonding. So,
well, knowing that, I'll change mine to 1.
I'll agree. Yeah.
I'll note that you are.
No, but I
yours is-
changed
You're
mine.
changed. Okay. Let's see. Would you like to hear recommendations for possible improvement to the task?
Yes.
Okay.
I love how that's a question.
I know.
What if
No,
say
I
no?
don't care. I know.
This is such a good task, Brenda, it's hard to even come up
I know.
with things. Is
yeah.
there any way, though, that you could make, and I don't know how this would work, because it would maybe lose some of the informality of it, and the kids just working through a problem together, but so that everybody has to be involved. And I don't know how you do that. I mean, even, that's everybody's
Well,
issue in
on
a
the
small group.
23rd, I mean, even using the little like penny tallies.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just because when we were talking, you know, like the first group, there was the one guy that didn't say anything. You know, maybe if they had the penny tallies, just to make sure that he says something in that conversation.
Right,
Or
right.
is it for an easy way for you to walk around and say, oh, this person's offered 7 ideas already and he hasn't offered any.
Okay.
And just to give a way to encourage
Yeah, that's
him
a
maybe.
good idea.
Because the only way I made sure if it wasn't part of me asking them each individually was when they came up with their rules, they had to have at least 6. It had to be everybody writing at least one of them. So then I could
Okay.
see the handwriting is changing and they're all
Participate.
in that way at least. But that means they could just be an observer or bystander. And sure, that was the only, at the time.
Brenda, what, out of the 4 parts, I mean, you had us score all, and you said you really wanted us to focus on the substantive conversation. But, okay, so I was just clarifying for that. So you feel like the breakdown, like the concept, they talked about concepts and they shared their ideas, but you were concerned that not enough of them were actually doing.
But yeah, that's the part I think, and anytime you work in
Sustain.
a small group, unless I'm right there listening to each small
Right.
group, how to make sure that they're each part of that they're contributing a good idea, or at least asking questions when they're
Right.
working in their
Right.
small groups.
Have you taught them how to do a substantive
No, I know, because I've seen some of the handouts and stuff to the English. I know some people have done that, and you have done that too. And I have not done that.
Because like Megan did it with her kids, and she said it was helpful to teach them how to do a substantive conversation so that they kind of hold each other accountable.
Right.
And instead of interrupting each other, they'll keep waiting
Mm-hmm.
for someone to say something because they're like, you have to say something in order for it to be substantive, and so sometimes they chip in
Right.
and are more.
And the statement starters and
But that's
question
what I was gonna
starters
say, I've
really
seen the
help my
prompt, the
students.
beginning
Yeah,
part.
the prompts
Yeah.
are awesome because it gives them that transition from your idea to my idea and how to tie it together a little bit. So I would say those are good ones. I'm just going to follow along here with this. Technology for this, I think this was great. I don't know if
I don't think it's
technology would-
necessary.
I don't know if, I mean, you could do a card sort, I guess, moving things on some program, but I don't know if that.
Electronic cards.
It's
not gonna
electronic
make it
card
any
sort,
better.
It may
yes.
not gain much. but-
Yeah, I
I
don't
was
think you
worried
would.
sometimes the computer too inhibits like
Yes.
some stuff.
Mhm.
But I don't know.
You know, if you, I don't think you could add it, but if you, maybe more of just a reflection piece at the end, you know, to maybe get them
Oh.
deepening that why is it important to look at things different ways, or, you know, just try to get them to that bigger picture of patterns. You know, not necessarily to have them perform the task using technology,
Okay.
but that might be kind of one of those anchor activities that keeps the kids who get done faster.
So you're talking
You know,
journaling at the end?
Yeah, you know, just a reflection on why. Why is it important to, or how does this, that could even maybe help the value beyond
Yeah.
school. How does that connect?
Yeah, that
When
one.
might
I
a
was thinking
scientist
that one.
use this?
You could also, I mean, just, we've been going through those common formative assessment pieces in PLC. I mean, if you really wanted like a ticket out the door, summative.com does ticket out the door.
That's what I was already, like that, your reflection could be the ticket out the door
Yeah.
of it on.
And that could be either very factual of like, you know, what pattern does this have?
Mhm.
Or it could be extensive learning about the big idea, the concept of patterns in general.
How does formative or summative assessment fit with this lesson?
This is formative. I mean, like the conversations we're having, what they're recording, all of it, I think falls under formative.
Okay. What kind of feedback has been most helpful?
I think all the feedback you guys gave me to make ways to ensure that all of them are contributing in the conversations, those two ideas, like the tally things. So again, on the tally is that they each get somebody to start with, and then they have to put them out when they talk, right? And then having the prompts and stuff, like I said, I know I've seen some of that, but we haven't sat down and said, oh, if when you guys are working in your small groups, this is how I want you using like these types of words to start your questions, or phrases and stuff like that. And then adding like the reflection piece is like super simple too, to add that at the end. And like you said, it could tie it into the real world to have that part of it. It could be factual, it could be that, so I think that's easy, that to add.
And I'm assuming you just answered this last question, but what might you change as a result of this discussion?
And
Kind of like the same question.
Yeah, and go back to like the prompts thing, if Megan did that, how, she would have done a lesson just on that then.
A mini little
Right.
lesson.
And then she just continues every time that she now works in small groups, she reminds them.
Maybe.
Do you think,
That
do
would
you
make
do it
sense.
too? Do you do it that way too?
I have my prompts, and they have them written down in their notebooks.
Okay.
And then I also have some index cards that some of them made when we did like our first little mini lesson.
Right.
And if they're like, if kids aren't using it, sometimes I just throw one of the index cards down to
Right.
help, just give them that reminder that these are the
Okay.
things that I want you to work on.
Okay.
You could maybe even have like the SIOP language target.
Uh-huh.
Like you could tie that in with your language target. Of like, I really want to hear you guys using these sentence stems because
Okay.
we have to have the language, or a 21st century skill of like good communication and like listening and receiving clearly.
Okay.
All right, so to end scoring instruction, each member of the team needs to say one positive item that they observed from Brenda's instruction.
I just think the climate in your room is great. You can tell that the kids want to be there, they're working, you interact well with them, they were interacting well with each other, it was really just positive climate.
I like how you can ask them such pointed questions to get them to think about things, but then you know when to back off and let them keep thinking. Instead of answering it for them or continuing to lead to more specific, simpler questions, you give them time to say, okay, now I want you to keep keep going with it, and then you back off. Where some people, kind of do it overboard, kind of when to back off and let them have their space, and that's good.
I'm going to echo Tracy a little bit. It was good that all people were involved. I mean, and it's very hard when you're getting filmed, that all kids felt the comfort level to actually participate in the conversation, and then you move to a different group and the same thing happens, so it wasn't, staged or planned. They actually were actively participating in it.
I'm always impressed when a student can ask a teacher a question and the teacher can respond with another question to get the kid there. So it was never spoon feeding the kid or giving the kid the answer. So I was impressed with your ability to think on the spot and be able to push them to the answer instead of just either giving it to them or giving them the easy way out.
I loved that you had them constructing their own knowledge with the patterns instead of just actually telling them. Actually, I have two, and I also love that you use the word ratio a lot in there.
It was so much, you said patterns, I said ratio probably just as much.
But no, I thought that was a great way of having them actually discover it versus, because you could have easily spent 5 minutes and told them the patterns, but
Yeah.
actually giving them that time to construct their own knowledge will make it much more meaningful, and I bet they understand it a lot better than if you would have just done the easy bit.
I think that you did a nice job of allowing them the time to think, and as others have mentioned, that you made them actually think instead of giving them information that they were looking for. So they might ask you, trying to get an answer from you, but instead you made it so they had to come up with their own answer, and they did construct their own knowledge.
I like the hands-on too.
Yeah,
Any
that
sort of
was nice.
kinesthetic thing that you can have.
Because it was just on paper, that wasn't part of the recommendation, but we made the little cards then, because I think that would help me learn it too.